Hello and welcome to AMP1. This is the beginning of a journey that will have you exploring the human body not only from an organizational, gross anatomy view. In other words, this is the heart, this is the kidney, these are eyes, this is the skin, but also on a deeper level of physiology. And it's once we get into the physiology that we start to understand and appreciate the complexity of the organism that we define as being Homo sapiens or humans. And we'll kind of dive into this a little bit more. I am Professor Young. I will be journeying with you through this next upcoming semester as we again start to look at the human body from a different perspective, from a perspective of organization, functionality, from a perspective of social implication and social impact. All of these things will go ahead and be discussed and looked at to give us this view of what is human anatomy and physiology. And I think if you look at the question that is before you on the screen, why study both anatomy and physiology at the same time? I've kind of touched on that. Right? To really understand the anatomy of the human body and not understand the physiology, how it works, you are greatly oversimplifying the body. To say that the heart is the heart, and you've got a right atrium and a left atrium and a right ventricle and a left ventricle, and the right atrium and the right ventricle are separated by a valve called the tricuspid valve, and the left atrium and the left ventricle are separated by a valve called the bicuspid or the mitral valve, is great. You point to something and you can identify it. But how does it work? How does that keep you alive? What is happening beyond the gross anatomy level that is allowing the atria and the ventricles to beat and contract? What are the forces involved? And to understand that, we need to get to a cellular level. In order to understand that, we need to get to a biochemical level. In order to understand that, you need to get to understand the physics of what is happening. See, it's never enough to just understand the anatomy. If you really want to understand the anatomy, we have to go into the cellular, the biochemical, and the physical realm of what it's doing. And likewise, to try to study physiology without any previous knowledge of the anatomy, none of it's linked. None of it makes sense. And so you need to understand the anatomy to understand the physiology. And you need to understand the physiology to understand the anatomy. And that is the fundamental reason why we have to study both of these at the same time. And yes, it can get overwhelming, but think about this. Would you take your car to a mechanic who can identify the manifold, who can identify the muffler, who can identify the air cleaner and the oil filters and the tappets and the spark plugs, who can understand the pistons, but don't understand how they work? They can take your motor apart. They can put it back together again. But they don't put any oil in the car, because the oil is what keeps everything lubricated. It's what reduces the friction. It's what helps to generate the heat and keep things moving without overheating the engine and causing a fire or the engine to seize. Have you ever done that? Have you ever ran your car down to no oil and then have your engine seize up and the car stops? The oil is the physiology. The oil filters, the mufflers, the manifold, the pistons, the cylinder heads, the crankcase. That's the anatomy. It's not enough just to understand the anatomy. You wouldn't bring your mechanic you wouldn't bring your car to a mechanic who can just simply identify parts of an engine. Just like you wouldn't go to a cardiologist that was great at identifying the left and the right atria, or the pulmonary semilunar valve from the aortic semilunar valve, but didn't understand how beta blockers work to reduce blood pressure. That would be a dangerous doctor. And so, understanding anatomy and physiology is critical in understanding allied health. Which, by the way, and those of you that are allied health professionals or on that allied health track, allied health, things like nursing, it's actually considered a social science. Because what you're doing is you're taking the science that you have learned and you're applying it to patient care. Allied health is not a STEM field, but it's so heavily rooted in the foundations and the understandings. Never forget what you learn in A&P1 and A&P2. This is the foundation that's going to make drug interactions make sense once you get into pharmacology in the nursing program. Or this is the foundation that you're learning now of muscle physiology that's going to make sense why you do certain exercises in the occupational therapy program or the PT program. Understanding why the walls of the heart changes in thickness is going to be foundational when you get into the cardiotech program. These are the foundations of understanding that will make you successful and an even better medical provider for your patients, because you will have context and understanding beyond just knowing what to do. Why? Why do you do that? What happens if the patient comes to you and says, why? Why? Why do I need a beta blocker? What does this do? How's this going to impact my health? That's not a very comforting response. So what you learn now in an A&P2 will become the foundation for everything that you do moving forward. When we look at the definition of anatomy, the Greek origin of anatomy is cutting up. It's because the earliest understanding of the human body was done through dissection. It was all done post-mortem. We did very little study of the human body on live patients. You can imagine why. Not many takers. And based on studying the body, we made presumptions about the physiology, which we got wrong a lot. Take me for A&P2 and I go into the entire evolution of understanding of how the heart works. Our understanding of how the heart works wasn't always so. The earliest anatomists were philosophers who were interested in science. So, when we look at how physiology, what we mean by relationship to nature, is more than just how does your body interact with the tree. That's not what we're talking about. What we're referring to here is relationship to nature at a physiological level. So how does your pancreas, which releases insulin, what relationship does that have to the liver? What relationship does that have to bone remodeling? What relationship does that have to brain function? What relationship does that have to muscle development? It's the relationship with the surrounding area. How does your brain being able to create action potentials within the neurons stimulate the hypothalamus to stimulate the pituitary gland to release hormones that travel to stimulate target tissues that then can release more hormones that have an impact within the body? Your body is its own ecosystem, and how the systems relate to one another is the study of physiology. And here's the thing. The earliest philosophers, the earliest anatomists believed that the anatomy defined the physiology because that's all they could work with. But the flip to that is really structure is always related to the function. In other words, how it works defines the anatomy. The physiology defines what it's going to look like. You don't build something and then apply the function to it. You say, I have a function, and you design the structure around that. Here's what I want this thing to do. And then you design it. Think of how the spoon was created. All they had was a fork, but they want to pick up soup. Fork doesn't work. And so you've got this function that you're trying to do. You need to scoop soup. But the fork has holes in it. Okay, so what do we need? We need an oval-shaped thing that has a scooped-out middle that can hold things. Ah, okay, let's get to work. You create the structure of this thing to meet the function. Voila, you call it a spoon. Structure is always related to function. Function is never defined by the structure. It is the function, it is the physiology that is driving the anatomy and what something looks like. Okay, you can see I get a little passionate during these things. All right. There's a lot more of this to come. Don't worry. Don't worry. So I want to play a little game with you guys here. And then we're going to kind of wrap things up because I want you to start thinking about this idea of function and structure. All right? The anatomy and the physiology. And it's a little game that I like to call Inside Out. So I'm going to give you 4 scenarios, and you have to decide whether or not this is inside the body or outside the body. All right? So number 1, is air that is inside of the lungs considered inside the body or outside the body? Inside or out? Air. The answer is air is outside of the body. It is not inside the body. Your lungs are directly attached to your bronchi, which are directly attached to the trachea, which is directly attached to the pharynx, which is directly attached to your mouth and your nose. It's got a direct path outside. The air never enters the body. In fact, when the air is in the lungs, what do? We remove oxygen and place it where? In the blood. Oxygen is brought into the body, but air remains outside. Why? This is what we have to explore this semester. Number 2. It's a piece of gum that is inside of the stomach, inside or outside the body. In the stomach, inside or outside? The answer is, it is outside. Your digestive system is outside of your body. Think of it like a tunnel that you drive through on the road. You enter at one side, you exit at the other side. You never really entered the mountain. You passed through it, but you never really go in the mountain. Right? Your mouth is the entrance to the tunnel. Your anus, your rectum, is the exit to the tunnel. And the two are directly connected. By the esophagus, by the stomach, by the small intestines, by the large intestines. The mouth is an opening to the outside world. The anus is the opening to the outside world. And they're both connected. In fact, in the intestines, what do? We absorb nutrients. We take that stuff that is outside of the body and we separate it out, and the good stuff we bring in. So the gum that is in your stomach is technically not inside the body. A fetus developing inside the uterus, is that inside or outside of the body? And the answer to the fetus inside of a uterus being inside or outside of the body is, it is outside of the body. Because the uterus is connected to the vaginal canal, which is connected to the outside world. The alien that is inside of you is actually external to the body. It is not in you. It's in the uterus, but the uterus is connected to the outside world. Think about organization of the body. So far, air is outside of the body, gum is outside of the body, aliens growing inside of your uterus, aka a fetus, is outside of the body. Is a tattoo inside or outside of the body? Tattoos, are they inside or outside of the body? The answer is, it's inside. Tattoos are inside of the body. They're in the dermis layer of the skin. It's actually part of the tissue that makes up the skin. That is the only thing on the list that is inside of the body. We will explore these things a lot more, but things to get you thinking. Right? Things that make you go, That's what's going to drive this course. All right. Let's wrap this all up. By the way, each video that we do, I try to keep it between 15 minutes and 30 minutes. I try not to go over 30 minutes. Sometimes I will, but I try not to. So I chunk the material for you to go back and be able to review and deal in smaller pieces. All right. So here's what we know so far about the body. We know that form and function are tightly linked. We know that in order to understand the structure, we have to understand the physiology. And in order to understand the physiology, we have to understand the form or the anatomy. All right? Think about that. Another name another name for, hold on one second, guys. Another name for form is the anatomy, and another name for function is the physiology. So we know that these guys are tightly linked. We know that to know the parts, you're lacking the understanding of the function. We know that. Right? We know to know the function without the parts is impossible. Right? And we also know that it is the function that drives the form. Function determines form. The physiology determines the anatomy, or what it looks like. And the other thing that you need to understand is that when we're dealing with the physiology, we're dealing with a cellular, molecular, and chemical understanding. And so with that, we're going to stop here for today, or for this session. All right. Kind of let you go through and kind of take in all of this. This was a good introduction to Professor Young. All right. And kind of let it sink in what it means to study anatomy and physiology. And so, with that said, I will leave you to do some review, and I'll catch you on the flip side.